name is Eric Mintel. By night, I'm a professional jazz musician, but by even later at night, I investigate the paranormal. I, along with my team, travel the country investigating all things paranormal. This is Eric Mintel Investigates.
Hi, ladies and gentlemen, it's Eric Mintel with Eric Mintel Investigates, and today we've got an incredible episode with Bill Birnes, Rick Lertzman about their new book, Dr. Feelgood. Check this out.
This starts from one single premise, and the premise was this, and Rick is poetic about this, but it's this: how could one, this is the germ, how could, not to go too crazy, but how could one of the stars, the biggest stars of the 1930s, Alfred Hitchcock's go-to hero, right? You look at all those Alfred Hitchcock movies from the middle to the late 30s, the 39 Steps, the Dilemma from Murder, all those movies. And who was the guy he liked? Bob Cummings. And then Bob Cummings, he worked for my godfather, one of the greatest, fabulous comedy shows of the 1950s. He introduced Dwayne Hickman, who became Dobie Gillett. I mean, it was fabulous. Ann B. Davis, the Bob Collins show. People loved it. But he wound up toward the end of his life in an institution, married to somebody who from a Piggly Wiggly in Tennessee. It was they carried him away in a straitjacket. This was the story. This was the thing. And Rick Lertzman asked the question, why? How did this happen? Take it over, Rick.
Bob Cummings was, as Bill said, was this great actor who was a health fanatic. His father was a physician in Branson, Missouri, and he knew health and he knew foods. And he wrote a book called How to Stay Young and Vital, which was one of the great health books of all time. It sold 3 or 4 million copies. So everybody saw Bob as this health fanatic, this vitamin fanatic. Well, he was doing a teleplay called 12 Angry Men, and he was doing it, and Rod Serling was involved because he was one of the writers on it. And Rod Serling took him to his physician, whose name was Dr. Max Jacobson, in Lexington in New York City. And this doctor was giving him a vitamin shot. Well, the vitamin shot contained 25 milligrams of methamphetamine, sheep sperm, monkey gonads, human placenta.
Wow.
It was a shot full of everything, but mostly methamphetamine. And Cummings felt energized, young, and youthful. And Cummings, the important thing to Bob Cummings was he wanted to remain youthful because he was getting older, and he was nearing his mid-50s, and he wanted that vitality and that feeling. So he started taking injections from Max Jacobson, and from there his life spiraled downwards. We discovered it from an old TV host named Art Linkletter.
Oh yeah,
who told us about Bob Cummings' drug addiction. So it was an amazing story. But as we started looking into Bob Cummings, we started seeing other patients of Max Jacobson, and that included President Kennedy, Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, Frank Sinatra, Jackie Kennedy eventually became a patient, the Pope Pius XII. The list is endless, and we were able to look at those patient lists that blew our mind.
Now, Rick, how did you come upon this? How did you find out this information?
Well, as I started exploring Bob Cummings, I was told by a friend of mine named C. David Heyman, who's a great writer, wrote a lot of books about Jackie Kennedy, and he was one of the most popular biographers of the 80s and 90s and 2000s, and David had done an exploration into Max Jacobson. So when I told him about Bob Cummings, he introduced me to Max Jacobson's wife, Ruth Jacobson, and he introduced me to his best friend, Michael Samick. So I got to know the Jacobson family, and we're able to look at the patient list from Ruth Jacobson. She saved all the patient lists, all of his dialogues, all of his journals. He had a biography he wrote in 1974 that contained all that information. It was a 300 and something page biography that we included in our new book. And it told the whole story of Max Jacobson in his own words. So we discovered a treasure trove of information.
Unbelievable. Now, obviously he's probably passed by now, but when did
Max Jacobson died back in the 1970s.
Okay.
But the fascinating thing, and this is what, Rick and I are looking at this and saying, hey, there's something crazy here, because why would he go on? It was almost as though Max Jacobson went on this kind of like a campaign to inject everybody with a special formula. So Rick and I said, and then not only did we look at the medical records, but Rick can tell you about some of the writings that Max Jacobson did during the 1950s. I mean, we include some of these in the Max Jacobson case book, but Max Jacobson actually believed, it's delusional, but he believed that people could live almost forever. Right, Rick? I mean, he wrote this thing like the New Age Man. What drugs could get people to live into their hundreds?
He wanted to look. He wanted to see how you can extend life, and he thought by using human placenta. He was doing stem cell research before anybody was doing stem cell research. He was a brilliant man. He had trained in the 1920s with August Speer. With Sigmund Freud, with Carl Jung. So he really had studied and was a brilliant surgeon and doctor. But as he entered the 1930s, he was trying to find a cure for multiple sclerosis. So instead of finding a cure, he discovered methamphetamine, and he created his own form of methamphetamine. He created a drug called Pervitin in Nazi Germany. And Hitler took away that Pervitin to give to the Luftwaffe to fly long hours in missions. And he escaped Nazi Germany because he was Jewish, and he was set to go to the camps. And he escaped with his wife and his son, came to the United States, and set a practice in Lexington. And almost immediately, he became a fair-haired boy of the jet set and a lot of great writers and producers and Broadway performers. So he became very well known early on.
When he was an intern, he was training in surgery. Now remember, the other current part about this Max Jacobson story is he was one of the doctors treating the 1918, 1919, 1920 Spanish flu, that incredible pandemic at the end of World War I. So here's this guy who is, he's dedicated, but he's trying to treat the flu. And then while this is going on, the surgeons all throughout Europe, especially in Germany, they were very surgically oriented. I mean, if they would got a problem? Let me open it up. Well, the problem was, this was before the very highly sanitized operating rooms of today. So as a result, you would hear, Max Jacobson himself said the one thing he heard over and over again, the surgery was successful, too bad the patient died. And the patients died from sepsis. Now, one of the interviews that Rick lined up, fabulous interview, was with Dr. Michael Baden, who was the medical examiner of New York, who actually was involved in the Max Jacobson case. Rick can tell you about that. But it was Baden. But it was Baden who said one of the crazy things about this is that people didn't understand that sepsis was the killer. Abraham Lincoln, he said to us, he said, Abraham Lincoln, people think, he was killed by a gunshot bullet. He wasn't killed by a gunshot bullet. He survived the gunshot bullet. It was sepsis that killed Lincoln the next day. That was the problem. You go watch Downton Abbey. What did the youngest daughter die from? Not childbirth. She died from sepsis. So sepsis was the villain that Max Jacobson tried to cure. and he tried to cure it by not doing surgery and treating the blood. That's why Rick just mentioned the placentas and the sheep gonads and the eel cells, because Max Jacobson thought, gee, if I could rejuvenate the blood, I could heal people. But it turned out to be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, yeah. What were there any like side effects? I mean, obviously, Cummings was feeling energized, but was there any like lasting side effects from?
Rick can describe what happened to Bob Cummings.
There are total side effects. Truman Capote said you feel like Superman. You feel like you're invincible. You can fly. But the problem is you crash. So Tennessee Williams experienced that. Every one of his patients. In fact, Tennessee Williams testified against Max Jacobson in his disbarment trial and said he nearly destroyed him, except the greatest creativity of many of these people came during the period that Max Jacobson injected him with methamphetamine. Truman Capote wrote in cold blood during that period. Tennessee Williams wrote some of his great works during that period. Rod Serling wrote The Twilight Zone and wrote Requiem for a Heavyweight. He wrote The Planet of the Apes during that period.
Wow.
So their creativity was helped through the Max Jacobson's methamphetamine, but the dark side, the downside is they did crash and they did suffer severe problems. Bill and I talked to a doctor named Lawrence Hatterer, who later treated Kennedy, and Hatterer told us a list of patients that he had treated from Max Jacobson to try to bring him back to normalcy, to recover from what Max had done to them.
Unbelievable.
And what folks don't realize, Eric, is that the greatest tragedy, beside Max's tragedy, the other tragedies, the greatest tragedy that resulted from this was the assassination of President Kennedy. Why? Because one of the things that we found out about President Kennedy, we found this out, Rick interviewed this guy, well, we both did, but I mean, it was Rick who uncovered him, Paul Landis. Paul Landis was on this Jackie Secret Service detail. And the things he was describing, and David Heyman described them too. I mean, Kennedy would be so hopped up on methamphetamines, and I mean hopped up. I mean, you talk about hopheads. This guy went wild. Rick will tell you the story about the Carlyle Hotel, but the thing is, Max Jacobson would escape from his Secret Service handlers. He would escape from the detail when he came to New York and have these assignations with call girls around Columbus Circle in New York. Now, can you imagine the President of the United States, absent his Secret Service, absent the NYPD, absent the CIA, having assignations with women in Manhattan? God knows what he was telling them. And then the story of Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe and what he divulged, because they were both Max Jacobson's parents. They were having sex, hopped up on methamphetamines. Rick can tell you what happened with Kennedy and the Carlyle Hotel.
Oh, the Carlyle Hotel. We met a gentleman named Michael Samick, who was vice president of Rand Corporation and later ITT. He became Max Jacobson's closest friend. His wife was the editor of Mademoiselle magazine. Her name was Edith Samick. So he would fly Max Jacobson to the White House twice or three times a week. And so they would fly in, they would both come into the lower gate. And one time when they came in, waiting for them at that gate was Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy had taken vials from Max Jacobson's bag and had it tested and discovered here's 25 milligrams of methamphetamine and the sheep gonad and the placenta and the eel. And he said, and he was fuming. He went to his brother and he said, "Are you insane? Do you see what this guy's giving it to you?" and JFK said, "I don't care if it's horse piss. It makes me feel good." So all of a sudden, here's Kennedy, and he's red-faced, and he said, "You stupid," and he started calling him anti-Semitic names. And both Max and Mike Samick had escaped Nazi Germany, and they were very insulted. He said, "You stupid," and he called him a kike, and he said, "How dare you give this to my brother? If you ever do this, I'm going to have you disbarred. You're going to go before every board." So Max Jacobson flew back to New York, wrote a letter of resignation, and sent it to Evelyn Lincoln, who was the president's secretary. The president went berserk. He flew to the Carlyle Hotel, and he called up Max Jacobson, and he begged him. He said, please come inject me. I need it. I'm really in terrible shape, so is Jackie. So the president came to the Carlyle Hotel, and we know this from several sources. One was Michael Samick, who had flown with them. The second is Paul Landis and Clint Richardson, who were the Secret Service agents who were there that time. And all of a sudden, Max injects Kennedy with 25 milligrams of methamphetamine. And Kennedy said, it's not enough, Dr. Jacobson. My back is horrible. I can't move. Now, the president suffered from Addison's disease, but he also suffered from back problems from PT 109 and from a lot of other sources. So he had a mobility problem. So he said, please, please, please. So Jacobson, he really didn't want to, but he injected him with a second dose of 25 milligrams of methamphetamine. That set Kennedy off into a psychotic break. When Jacobson left, Kennedy started taking all of his clothes off, started running naked up and down the halls of the Carlyle Hotel. Well, the problem is, the floor below was the press corps. So Kennedy's running toward the stairwells, and he's running nude, and Paul Landis, who's a Secret Service agent, goes, I don't know what to do. So they held down Kennedy, said, we can't put him in a straitjacket. This is the president. We can't put him in a straitjacket, and he has access to the button. And so they call up Dr. Lawrence Hatterer, who is the chief of psychiatry at Cornell University. Now, Bill and I interviewed Larry Hatterer. I didn't realize he was alive, and we went and found him. He had this gorgeous townhouse in New York City, and Bill and I went to visit him. He was one of the great psychiatric minds of that century. And Hatterer said he injected him with a sedative that brought Kennedy down. And then he said, well, who did this? He asked the Secret Service. And Landis gave him the number of Max Jacobson. He called up Max Jacobson, and he said, Dr. Jacobson, what did you give the president? What set him off? He goes, no, I can't give that kind of information. That's my formula. But what I'll do is, if you come to my office, I'll inject you, and you can see how you react. And Hatterer said, no, thank you. And watching was the CIA, was the Secret Service. So everybody knew that the president was out of control and that Max Jacobson was behind this.
Now, did the press corps see any of this going on, or were they out of the loop?
The press corps was completely out of the loop in this matter because they kept him out. But there were rumors that abounded all over the country that here he is. When Kennedy went to the Vienna summit to meet with Nikita Khrushchev, there were the press corps. And when Kennedy walked out after Max double dosed him during that, and he was slurring his words with Khrushchev, he came out and told the press corps, told the New York Times, he said, I did a terrible job. I was weak. And they could see that he was slurring his words, and there in the corner was Max Jacobson. So it was kind of an unknown, they never revealed the secret that Max Jacobson was there. It was like the Forrest Gump was there in every situation that Kennedy was at.
Kennedy said, by the way, after that meeting, it was the worst. He told the New York Times, he's called Scotty Reston of the Times. He said it was the worst day of my life having that meeting. And here's where Rick put his finger on it. This is exactly the danger of Max Jacobson, because Kennedy was so slurred in that meeting. He was so out of it. He was basically drunk on meth at that meeting, stumbling around. Khrushchev, who knew, that's the other secret of Max Jacobson. Max Jacobson, when he went to Prague after fleeing Germany, after he was told that he and his family were on a list to be taken to the concentration camps, he was turned by the NKVD, the Soviet military intelligence in Vienna. So by the time he came to the United States, right before the outbreak of World War II, J. Edgar Hoover knew that this doctor had been turned by the Soviet spy agency. So here's a case where there's a Soviet spy in the who had been turned by the Soviets in the White House, treating the president of the United States. So when Kennedy had that break at the Carlyle Hotel, then entered the affair with Marilyn Monroe, began spilling state secrets. And Monroe was also a Max Jacobson patient all the way back from the 1950s.
Wow.
The Secret Service got very worried. And when you look at the danger that he posed, spilling state secrets to Marilyn Monroe during pillow talk, writing these crazy memos about UFOs to all the heads of the military, right, to the 4 generals. He said, hey, release all your military secrets to the Soviets about UFOs because we're going to go to space. When he did that, the odd thing was that the Secret Service knew, hey, that contributed, we believe, to the Kennedy assassination. So that Max Jacobson's, what he did was he set President Kennedy up for a psychotic break that got the Secret Service to say, this guy's got to go.
Wow. And then, of course, then that could lead into a whole bunch of other conspiracy theories, which we have not enough time to talk about now. But...
Well, absolutely. I mean, if they went to Lyndon Johnson and said, hey, look, what we need you to do, the president's going to go. You have a choice. Pretend this is Monopoly. You can go to jail because what was happening in 1962, 1963? Johnson was the vice president, because of his relationship with Bobby Baker and Billy Saul Estes in the United States Senate, was under terrible investigation. This guy was going to go to jail. Johnson came to the United States Congress, this is LBJ, who, but for the Vietnam War, would have been one of our greatest presidents. He came to Congress dirt poor. He didn't have a new pair of shoes when he came to DC from Texas. And over the course of his Senate career, he made $30 million in the communications industry. You want to tell me how he did that? He did that because he was dirty. So the Secret is catching up to him in early 1963. The Secret Service says, look, it was actually the CIA, it was Cord Meyer, who says to him, hey, look, you can go to jail, which is what's going to happen when Baker goes down, or you can go to the White House. Choose. I'll go to the White House.
Yeah.
You're going to cover this up. And if you listen to the Lyndon Johnson tapes from 1965, 67, right before he quits he says he's not going to run. If you listen to those tapes, he's screaming, we can't win this war. This is an endless war. Then he says, the generals are making me do this. How could they make him do this? He was blackmailed. They knew exactly what he did. That's Max Jacobson.
Wow.
It's actors and stars who were on that list were just astounding. Anthony Quinn, Christopher Plummer, who's still alive, who told us stories. It went on and on and on, and it was in Hollywood. Max Jacobson has a son. He's still alive. His name is Dr. Thomas Jacobson.
Have you interviewed him?
What's that?
Have you interviewed him?
We have interviewed him.
Okay.
And Tommy is nearly 90 now. Tommy became Max Jacobson West Coast. He took his practice and he moved out to the West Coast. And while he was waiting for his practice to set up, he treated Marilyn Monroe in Los Angeles. He was there the day she died. He supplied her with methamphetamine. And he had supplied Elizabeth Taylor. Tommy and Max was busy in New York at the time. Tommy flew to London at Eddie Fisher's request to treat Elizabeth Taylor, and he saved her life. He discovered Elizabeth Taylor was suffering from, as Bill said, sepsis. And so it was Tommy, through Max, who saved Elizabeth Taylor's life, and she was forever grateful. And in fact, she gave Tommy a gigantic diamond ring that he told us he regrets to this day that he gave to his ex-wife. He said he wished he kept it.
Unbelievable.
It's East Coast, West Coast. He covered the entire country. And even more so, he had a partner named Prince Stash Radswell, who was Lee Radswell's husband, who was the brother-in-law of John Kennedy. And Stash Radswell set up in Point Lookout, New York, near the Hamptons. He set up a lab that was an international lab to produce methamphetamine that Stash Radswell sold throughout the world and made millions.
And no one, like, no one got caught for this? I mean, it was like, it was just like out there. They're out there doing this like under the radar?
Absolutely.
He was
And the
under the
crazy
radar.
thing was that Stash Radswell was running this thing from Buckingham Place, from Queen Elizabeth's palace.
Wow.
They're running a worldwide, and when you see the movie with Gene Hackman, The French Connection, that was Max Jacobson and Stash Radswell. A Polish prince
Wow.
and an American Jew, well, he's not American, he's a Polish Jewish doctor, were setting up a worldwide methamphetamine ring, making scads of money right under the radar with everybody looking.
What an incredible story. Guys, thank you so much. Bill, always a pleasure. Rick, what a pleasure to meet you. And I can't wait to get this out and get our viewers to check this out. But I want to thank our viewers for watching today, and stay tuned. We've got a lot more guests coming up.